Welcome, everybody. We'll get started in just a moment. Right. Got quite the participation today, so thanks for joining us. We're going to just give it another second here for folks to join. Right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Launch Michigan's first virtual learning session. Today's session is focused on graduation requirements, a topic that is in support of the Michigan Education Guarantee. My name is Renee Morris. I serve as the Director of Fund Development and Stakeholder Engagement for Launch Michigan. I'm going to be dropping my contact information into the chat, so please use me as a resource. Reach out to me anytime. I would love to meet you. But before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. We are recording the session. The recordings will be shared on our website and via our socials, so you can refer back to them. We anticipate you'll have some questions, and we hope that you do. So please place those in the chat at any point during the presentation, and we'll address as many questions as we are able to within the time. I would also like to acknowledge this is a three-part series. This is the first part of a three-part series. The next two sessions will be scheduled for Monday, December 16th, which is a week from today, and then again on Monday, January 6th. Both sessions will start at noon, so we will be sending notices and reminders out for those and encourage you to register similar to how you did today. That is all for housekeeping, so I would like to turn things over to my President and CEO, Dr. Venessa Keesler, to get us started.
Thanks, Renee. And thanks, everybody. I just want to echo what Renee said. We're so excited that so many of you decided to join us today. We appreciate you taking time. I know it's a busy time of year. It's a Monday. It's a lot going on. So it's really great to have you here. Looking at the RSVP list, I know some of you know me, but some of you might not. So like Renee said, I'm Venessa Keesler. I've been the president and CEO of Launch Michigan for just over a year now. I'm a career educator. I started my career in the classroom as a 7th grade social studies teacher, but the bulk of my almost 25 years of education experience has actually been at the state and federal policy level. So talking about graduation requirements, talking about some of what we're looking at today is what I've spent most of my education career working on, and excited to offer this learning session today for all of you. If you are not familiar with Launch, we are a cross-partisan nonprofit organization. We represent a coalition of education, business, labor, and philanthropy, and we're focused on helping reimagine Michigan's public education system. We are guided by a 3-part framework. I'm not going to talk about a lot today, but you can find it on our website. That framework includes reinvention, which is ensuring a meaningful high school diploma for all students that they can attain through multiple pathways. There's some other pieces there. Second part of the framework is a fully and equitably funded education system. And the third part is governance that is aligned from the top of the system down to the classroom, and that ensures that we have an efficient and effective education system in Michigan. And again, love to talk about the framework. We'll be happy to talk about it more. But today we are focused on this, the Michigan Education Guarantee. Renee alluded to it in her intro comments. About a year ago as well, the Growing Michigan Together Council that was convened by Governor Gretchen Whitmer. This was a cross-partisan, many perspectives represented group that got together and asked the question of, what does Michigan need to do to grow our population? And there were several strategies that came out of that group, but one was focused on K-12 education. And that report said, we need to commit to the Michigan Education Guarantee. And what that is guaranteeing that every Michigan student graduates with the future-ready skills and competencies needed to thrive in work and in life. And there was broad agreement in that group that that's one of the important steps Michigan needs to take. It's really the first step we need to take when we think about reinventing our K-12 system, making sure that we are offering every student those opportunities. And so launch has been, since that time, trying to activate, making sure people understand that this was the call coming out of that group, understanding what this could mean and look like. And then with this series, we wanted to add some specific information, some, I would call it level setting, or some background information. As we go into these conversations, making sure we're all working from the same playbook. We have the same set of knowledge. So we're starting today with looking at graduation requirements, because when you ask the question, what does every Michigan student need? What are those future ready skills and competencies? And what do they just thrive in work and in life? You're really at some level, pragmatically, the policy piece you're talking about, part of the policy piece is graduation requirements. We had a really good question before the webinar about, shouldn't we be thinking about curriculum? What do students really need to be doing? And what does it look like? What's important for the future? And absolutely, I would say graduation requirements are the state level policy lever that gets pulled as part of this, but that is within an ecosystem of changes that happen at both the state, the district, the school, and the classroom level. So we wanted to just do a little bit of background on those graduation requirements, what other states have learned, but there is more to this. And then looking down the road a little bit, we did want to make sure people understand what's happening in Michigan now. I imagine this crowd here has a lot of interest in things like graduation requirements and content standards, but not everybody spends all their time thinking about that. So we want to make sure people understand what Michigan actually does right now in those areas, and then taking a little look at our current accountability and assessment systems. I did spend part of those years at state and federal policy level. I spent 10 years at the Michigan Department of Education, most of those as deputy superintendent, over areas that included assessment and accountability. So when I'm out now in my day job talking about what's going on, where Michigan needs to go, I hear people say a lot of things like, well, what we need is an accountability system that does this. And I often find myself saying, well, the accountability system we have does do that, or the assessment system, let me give you some more information about what we have now. So our friends at the MDE do a great job of providing this information as well. So we just wanted to help lift up some of that and make sure, again, as people are entering into a Michigan Education Guarantee conversation, we have that set of shared knowledge. So today, our objectives focusing on graduation requirements are making sure we all understand the importance of clear and rigorous graduation requirements, and then understand context related to what they are. I already gave a little bit of that, but what are they? Why do we have them? And then we're going to look at an example of how one other state has evolved their workforce requirements, but we're going to provide a resource that gives you some more examples from more states. So again, we're going to start with why do graduation requirements matter, and then move into thinking about what does it mean to reimagine them, and highlight a little preview, if you will, of graduation requirements in Michigan. Okay, so here's that multi-layer context. As you probably know, education exists. There's multiple levels of governance over education, even outside of the state. So with graduation requirements in particular, federal legislation requires that states include high school graduation rates in their accountability system. That's been in place since No Child Left Behind was implemented. There's more flexibility under the Every Student Succeeds Act to some degree, but still the requirement to include a graduation rate, a cohort graduation rate, that comes from the feds. What it is, what it means, how you define it, all of that is much more, is left to the states. So the states do set their own graduation requirements. As we'll talk about later in the presentation, Michigan currently has the Michigan Merit Curriculum, which was adopted in 2006. So that's the state saying, here's in general, what are the graduation requirements? But then districts have the responsibility to do two big things. One is adopt at a local level what satisfies those graduation requirements, what a diploma means, what you have to do to get a diploma in that district, and they have to track student progress toward those graduation requirements. So there's multiple pieces working on graduation requirements. Why do these matter? Why do we have them? Why are they important? Graduation requirements are an important part of giving meaning and value to that high school diploma. So again, going back in time, originally to the merit curriculum being implemented or the inclusion of graduation rates in federal accountability requirements, there was this conversation around, well, what does it really mean to graduate? What does a high school diploma mean? What can you do? What does it signify? What signal is it sending? Without those requirements, without that understanding of what it means to graduate, a diploma really is just a piece of paper. The other thing, and this is, again, not really news, but underlying this conversation around what do graduation requirements mean, is that the value of a high school diploma alone is in decline. So, there was a time when simply having that piece of paper from high school was something that would allow you to get a job, provide for your family. The degree the degree itself was enough. And you see this little bit of data. If you read from left to right on this chart, in 1983, 32% of jobs required less than a high school diploma, and another 36% of jobs required only a high school diploma. So, almost 70% of jobs that having that high school diploma was enough, and then a small portion of the workforce went on to advanced degrees and got positions from there. Moving ahead to 2021 and then looking down the road to 2031, that dramatically changes. So having a high school diploma alone is less important or less sufficient for getting for entering the workforce and having those meaningful jobs that allow you to sustain your life, your family's life. And it becomes more important that the high school diploma is not the terminal degree, that it prepares you for the next thing. So when we sit now in this moment and we say, what's a meaningful high school diploma? Like, what does that look like? It needs to signal not only that the student attended enough high school, but that the student is prepared and they're ready for what is next. And it must be based on what they need beyond graduation. And again, that has shifted over time. So the need for post-secondary education of different levels, that does not mean exclusively a four-year diploma or a four-year degree, but it does mean that post-secondary training through various credential programs, stackable credentials, on-the-job, there's a lot of different pieces there. Our graduation requirements need to be based in that. And what I think is critical, and what actually the national conversation is recognizing as critical, is that we did a good job in the last 20 years articulating what those requirements for a high school diploma might be to be ready for post-secondary education, but we may have lost some of the understanding of what it means to be ready for post-secondary education and the workforce, particularly in an environment where it's not as siloed. It's not like you go to college or the workforce. It's you go to this training program and attain this credential and get into the workforce and then go back, or there's different pathways, and there need to be more pathways, particularly given the evolving nature of our workforce needs. So that brings us to this moment, which is what, at Launch Michigan, we're suggesting. Michigan has arrived at this moment, but we've arrived here with other states because everybody is kind of asking the same question. Everybody, No Child Left Behind has been in place about 20 years. So everybody is having the same conversation around, are we getting the outcomes? Are our students truly prepared for their next step? And if not, what needs to change? So a group called Education Strategy Group produced an excellent policy brief on reimagining graduation requirements. Renee is going to drop that in the chat for you. Like I said, there's a lot more information in there. There's other examples. We're not, in the interest of brevity today, not taking up your whole lunch hour, we're not going to go through all of them, but would encourage you to review that resource. And Launch Michigan is part of a convening pulled together by the Joyce Foundation with a number of different nonprofits in Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota, Michigan. And we had the opportunity, one of the big focus of that convening is career and college readiness. And so we had an opportunity recently to review this policy brief and have this conversation with our partners in other states. And so when we think about reimagining graduation requirements, there is a recognition that there needs to be a shift from our traditional graduation requirements to college and career readiness aligned high school graduation requirements. Now, I'm just going to say, if you're like me and you've been around this table for a while, you might be thinking, we did career and college readiness. We did it in 2012. We did it in 2010. We've been here, and we have. But what what this brief does a good job of pointing out, what I want to lift up, is that what we did in the 2000s was really this fairly traditional high school graduation requirements that focused on mastery of academic content standards and high school diploma attainment. And I think when you think about the last 20 years, there has been a lot of that. What is content standards? What credits do you need to graduate? That sort of piece. What are those like academic pieces that you need? And many traditional graduation requirements came up with this foundational set of core courses in English, math, science, and social studies. And again, now I'm spoiler alerting the rest of my presentation, but in Michigan, before we adopted the Michigan merit curriculum in 2006, all you had to have was one course in civics. That was the only statewide graduation requirement. So even to agree to a set of foundational core courses that every student needs to have, that was a huge step forward in terms of rigor and articulating pathways beyond high school for students. In general, traditional high school graduation requirements were more limited on electives, and it was focused on credit accumulation for diploma attainment. Fast forwarding to now, and we're at this juncture to say, okay, we have these requirements, they have brought us some gains, but what's the next? Again, 20 years is a long time in education, and it's a long time in the world. A lot has happened in our world in the last 20 years. When we think about college and career readiness aligned high school graduation requirements, these future ready ones, thinking about prioritizing both mastery of academic content along with that experiential learning to help support college and career readiness. Because one of the things that everyone working on this is acknowledging is that kids need more than courses or credits to be ready for their next step. They need more opportunities. They need chances to do the experiential learning. There's also an emphasis on enhanced core courses that are aligned to those college admission requirements, but also this addition of college and career readiness competencies. And this, when we think about the Michigan context, that's those future ready skills and competencies. 21st century skills is another term for that. What you need to transition into post-secondary in the workforce is not only course content, it's also competencies like collaboration, like communication, like timeliness, etc. College and career readiness, this kind of future ready look integrates electives with that focus on enhancing college readiness and career exploration. And again, I think Michigan made some steps toward this with the merit curriculum that maybe puts us ahead of some other states already. We already have a lot of push toward electives, but I think what's acknowledged now when you look at the national landscape is that it's really important that electives be part of that readiness and career exploration in a more integrated way. And then the last kind of component of these future college and career ready requirements, adding credit requirements for advanced coursework opportunities that are aligned with those college and career readiness standards. So not just what you need, the kind of core content, but also thinking about career tech, dual enrollment, other things that allow you to take steps towards your future. And again, Michigan has made some strides toward this already. So ESG offers, based on their work with other states and their review of the literature, 6 principles for revising graduation requirements. And I want to share them with you now because I think as we think about this as a state, integrating these principles into our planning would be important. So principle 1, and we already talked about this quite a bit on this webinar, align the high school diploma with those expectations of college and career readiness. So 1 and 2 really go together. 2, leveraging higher education and workforce leaders in the design. We can't fully articulate those expectations of college and career readiness if we don't have a table that includes both K-12, higher education, and workforce to say, what content do we need? What competencies do we need? And how do we make sure students have an opportunity to gain those and demonstrate those? And it's acknowledging that the third principle is keep the rigor. Adding those rigorous course requirements in the early 2000s was not only about increased requirements, it was also about equity. We knew at that point it was easy to be in a district. One district might give you great access to a college-ready curriculum, and the one next door might not. And so we don't want as a state to have students' ability to access high-quality learning opportunities to be based on their zip code. And so as we think about new or updated graduation requirements, we have to keep the rigor and recognize that kids have many different pathways into the workforce, and that we have to be flexible with how diplomas can be awarded and how that, finding that balance. So again, like any time anybody puts out 6 principles for doing anything, all of these are easier said than done. But I think if we keep them as a North Star in our work, keep asking the question of, is this balancing rigor with flexibility? That's what's important. The other 3 recommendations are the principles for revising graduation requirements, tracking robust measures of college and career readiness that go beyond test scores and credit. I mean, this is the thing we all know. It's also the thing that tends to be hardest to do. Is we know that true readiness, especially that future ready skills and competencies, we know it's not fully encapsulated in how you do on this on a test or what your grade point is. However, those other more robust measures are harder. So it's always this balance of like the burden, the data burden, the challenge, the cost with the meaningfulness of what we're tracking. But again, I think when you put the principle up and you keep it as a North Star and you say, hey, we want to try to have, we don't want to just default to what we already know. What are really meaningful data points that help us know if students are truly college and career ready, and how do we work toward that? And then as always, we need to monitor data to guide improvements and invest in change management support. So when you change graduation requirements, even in a small amount, but especially if we were to do a more major revamp, we have to understand that there's levels of the system that have to make their own adjustments. There has to be time for people to do local planning. There has to be changes in many different facets of the system, and there has to be two-way communication. So graduation requirements by their nature are a state level thing, but one of the things we've been talking about at launch in the last year is it's in some sense easy to pass laws. It's a lot harder to implement laws. And so we have to always be focused on practical policy implementation. What's it really going to take for students to be able to have access to these college and career ready competencies? What's it going to take for teachers, for principals, for district leaders? I just had an opportunity to review work that Detroit Public School Community District has been doing to rethink the high school experience. And they have, as a huge part of it, teacher support and time for implementation. So, as we think about where Michigan might need to go in the future, we have to remember that the full implementation has that change management support, and we have to be realistic about the time it takes to move a system. Okay, now we're into our example. So, like I said, in that policy brief that we shared in the chat, there are some other examples, but we wanted to bring forward Rhode Island, who has just recently gone through this exercise because they did a really nice job of integrating what we might think of as more traditional college and career ready requirements with some of these future ready competencies. We just learned last week, we did a kind of learning session with some experts, and we learned last week that they started with an opportunity audit, kind of looking to say, where do kids have opportunities and where are their opportunity gaps? I think in some ways, Michigan's Growing Michigan Together Council report asked a similar question, like where do we want to go and where are there gaps? So it's good that we have that data and that conversation supporting our conversation here. So Rhode Island went into it and they said, okay, there's these 4 components. The first part was this college and career ready component. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because this looks somewhat similar to what you would expect. Students are required to take core academic courses, and then they added some college and career ready activities. So in Rhode Island, you're required to submit the FAFSA, to complete a resume, and then to demonstrate proficiency in in the following subject areas. So civics, computer science, financial literacy. So that's how they said, here are some real world relevant skills that we want to make sure students have. They also added this idea around academic study. And this really caught my eye. I thought this was very interesting. So students have to complete 3 independent connected courses. So this is focused on increased complexity, that you want to have this complementary and cumulative content. It's really an opportunity for deep learning. and for students to specialize into something that they care about. And one or more of these has to be advanced or experiential. So again, going back to this idea of we need kids to be able to access advanced course taking or experiential learning or both. They built it in here through this academic study. And at least 2 should be beyond the expected courses for all students. So again, they took this idea of kids being able to dive deep into something they care about, connected to their future, and created this state level requirement of academic study, but then left a good degree of flexibility for it to be student-based, based on interest. And then again, this also caught my eye. They went ahead and said, you have to have a work-based learning experience as part of your graduation requirement. So this has been interesting to me. Launch has been spending the last year talking to lots of different groups, and this comes up a lot. People, when you say, what do kids really need? Like, what's really important about how to, like, I'm sorry. Sorry, I just got a question in the chat and it distracted me. I apologize. I told the team, I'm like, I can read the chat and talk, and then I just totally did not. So, okay. So work-based learning, when we talk with people out in the field, when we've had this conversation and you say, what do kids really need? You know, what's happening? Almost every time the conversation comes back around to kids need a chance to work, like having a job is really important, et cetera, et cetera. So it's interesting to me that Rhode Island put that in their graduation requirements. Again, as a previous State Department person, I immediately go to questions about how do you do this? How do you ensure it? How do you balance it? But I just think it is, again, the most common thing that people end up with is the importance of work. And so we're intrigued to see how they're implementing this in Rhode Island. Yeah. So there's a really, I'm going to pause and take this question for a minute. The question that I saw that I wanted to react to, the question of students with IEPs and how they fit in this framework. So yes, even as I was talking, I thought the question is going to be, what if this framework is not accessible to all students? What if there's students for whom this is not their, it's not what's required or what's appropriate given their IEP. I will just say, and I will apologize for this up front, that was not a deep point of the brief. And so I just want a big asterisk is, as Michigan has this conversation, we always have to ask, how do you modify? What are the modifications available for any graduation requirements that we have? I'm sure Rhode Island has those, and we can look into that more and provide that out through the registration. But that was not a significant focus. But it's an excellent reminder that while we set high standards, we always have to ask, how can all students access these standards, and what modifications, what supports, what pathways are necessary to make this available and accessible to all students. And the last thing Rhode Island added is a diploma assessment. So they, again, going back to that, they went all in on data and measures that are more than just the tests or the credits. Students have to complete a performance-based diploma assessment so they can demonstrate their knowledge of the topic they studied, demonstrate their knowledge and skills, and reflect on their pathway experience. And I'm intrigued by this one too. This is obviously the most rigorous, and I mean, what a great opportunity for kids, right, to complete something like this. And I'm curious about the logistics. So this is another thing we're trying to get more information on. But it is exciting to see that a state put this kind of stake in the ground and are moving toward it, because we are never, as a nation, we're never going to do more. We're never going to have a different conversation around assessment and measurement unless we start having a different conversation around it, acknowledging that it's not easy or cheap, or there's levels of change that would have to happen. It looks like the way they do this is at the local level with some degree of reporting to the state. But it is exciting if we care. The old adage, what you measure is what gets paid attention to. It's probably not said the most eloquently. Having this sort of assessment helps pay attention to the right things that kids really do need for that future success. It also, the act of participating in this assessment would be really meaningful for students. Okay, as we kind of come toward the end of today, we're going to dive into this more in the future, but I did want to do just a little bit of graduation requirements in Michigan. Probably a lot of you on here are familiar with MDE's page on this. It's excellent. There's lots of information. And they do a lot of really great training on this. So this is not meant to replace any of that in-depth. It's a high-level reminder and a little bit of history. So if you're not all remembering, merit curriculum was adopted in 2006. Again, it was coming out of the Cherry Commission. It was at that time this acknowledgement that Michigan was lagging behind in terms of post-secondary credential attainment, and a recognition that with our current high school graduation requirement being only civics, kids weren't prepared to make that transition into post-secondary education. Interestingly, the way that this was set was it was mostly higher ed and K-12 involved, and there was a curriculum audit almost, or an evaluation of like, what classes do you need, or what courses, what credits, what kind of content do you need to be exposed to go to post-secondary, to go to like four-year university. And so I call that out because I think we're asking at this point a similar question, and also what other competencies, what future ready competencies, what things do you need that might not be solely the coursework aspect. It is not to take away the importance of coursework and access to high quality coursework, but to say there's a general recognition in the country that we have to broaden our requirements to include that content plus those future ready skills and competencies. So it was adopted in 2006. It was huge. Michigan was one of the first to do it, and it's applied to every graduating class since 2011. If you are not familiar, probably most of you on here could say these in your sleep, but the current merit curriculum really does emphasize coursework, and it emphasizes credit, the accumulation of credit. I want to be clear, and I'll use my talking points from when I was at the department. Although many people implement the merit curriculum as we have to take classes, courses named certain things, that is actually not what the merit curriculum says. It says you have to have exposure to the content. In practice, most districts, because there's example course names in the law, most districts are like, we have to have these courses. MDE has been trying for a long time to be like, it's not necessarily, no, it's access to this content that covers these standards. But I'm one who feels like at this point, it's a distinction without a difference in a lot of places, because it's so ingrained for people to think it's this class, but that is not actually what the law says. And I know there's a bill right now that Representative Glanville is trying to get passed that would help remove some of that confusion. So there we go. And this is just, kind of explaining again how the credits line up. So at this point, when I look at this landscape, I think that what I see happening is the Growing Michigan Together Council said, oh, we have to have these future ready skills and competencies. And when we go out and we talk, people are like, yeah, they should. But we have not yet gotten together and said, what are those skills? And then more importantly, if we agree to them, how do you implement them? They might not all be implemented through graduation requirements. There might be other mechanisms, but it's hard to see, given what's happening nationally, and just given what we know about the merit curriculum and graduation requirements and how they function, it's hard to see that graduation requirements wouldn't be part of a conversation about ensuring that all Michigan students have agreement, or all students have access or graduate with future ready skills and competencies. So if we can work together at this point, define the Michigan Education Guarantee like GMTC called for, it's a chance for us to take, that visionary role that we had in 2006 and do it again in 2025, 2026 for our students. So we are closing up for today. I will take questions if you're putting them in the chat. But just a reminder, we're going to dive more into the Michigan landscape at session 2. If there's things you want specifically, or if there's a question about the landscape that you're like, oh, I'm really wondering this, feel free to let us know. We'll try to integrate it. And then moving for the third session into talking about accountability and assessment. And with that, thank you. We appreciate your time. And are there any questions? As Renee said, you should feel free to email. She left her email and her phone number. Should feel free to email us if you again, have questions, want follow-up, want to have more discussion. We're very happy. We've been talking about the Michigan Education Guarantee all year. So we love talking about that, graduation requirements, and just in general, connecting with stakeholders. So please do reach out to us with any questions, concerns, or an invitation to collaborate. Renee?
It looks like somebody is raising their hand. Let's go to, oops, that was me. You could come off mute. You can raise your hand.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello.
Okay, the chat has been disabled. I just
Oh.
want that's what you see when you go to it. So the only question I had is, are we going to have any opportunity to look at employer wants and needs? There's a fair amount of literature on what employers are looking for in the present and in the future in terms of skills.
Yeah. Yes. I think that's a great question, Mike. I think that's who asked that question, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I think there's two answers to that. We could, if you'd like, Launch can do a session where we share what we're hearing. Maybe we can reach out to you and make sure we're looking at the same literature that you are. We also represent a coalition, like I said, of business, education, philanthropy, labor. So we talk a lot with our business partners about what they see. So that's a great idea for a session that we could do. I think in this context, what Launch would advise, and that's one of the principles from this sort of conversation, is that from the inception of talking about grad requirements, you have business workforce at the table so that we can have that broadened conversation, understanding of what employers really do need, what they're seeing in kids who are coming in, or kids, graduates at any level who are coming into their workforce.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I should have been saying the Q&A is live, but the chat is disabled. So that's probably my error. Sorry, Mike.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
We will be happy to, yes, we will definitely be sharing this PowerPoint presentation, and we are recording and we'll make these available on our website. A great question about funding to help schools implement CTE initiatives. So one of the things that Launch talks a lot about, not just Launch, like there's general acknowledgement, but when we talk about this conversation, we say we have to define the Michigan Education Guarantee, right? Like, what are the future ready skills and competencies? What does it look like? And then the next question is, what does it take to get there? And that becomes a combination of changes to current laws, changes to current policies, changes to rules, and it also is a conversation around funding. So remember, maybe if you recall, at the start of the presentation, I talked about our framework, Launch's framework. Our framework says reinvention, resources, and responsibility. Those things all have to happen together. So we as a state have many times been like, here's a brand new initiative and there's no money for it, or here's money, but there's not a clear direction about where we're trying to go, or things like that. So yes, I think once we have the goal, the most important conversation is, what does it take to actually get there? And there are many things, to the point of this question, there are many things, if we were to move forward with them, that there are changes required in both amount or perhaps structure of funding. This is a little bit of my background as a measurement person, is I'm always like, well, what is the standard, or what is the thing? And then what's the programming to go with it, or what's the money, or what's the change? Okay, so Karen has a question in the chat about mastery versus exposure. And so Karen is she's a Launch board member too, and she's also excellent at reminding us of some of the history and the pieces of this. So merit curriculum ensured students were exposed to content. Local districts currently are deciding if students need to master that content in order to graduate. Yeah, so while rigorous and robust work-based learning is essential, if our students don't master academic content, the additional rigor will fall short. What's our thinking about that? I think that there is, I go back to when we agree to what students really, when you say, what does a graduate really need to be able to do? What are those what are those core skills? Before the Michigan Education Guarantee launch, talked about it as a meaningful high school diploma. So what are they? And then you have to ask the question, how do we know that students have it? And so if it is, there's some measurement involved. If it's test-based, if it's, again, I'm intrigued by Rhode Island's diploma assessment. And then how do you know that you're on track or not? So all of these questions they're critical to having a well-implemented system. And that principle 6 that talked about change management and implementation, like making sure that we say, this is the goal, this is how we know, and then these are the checkpoints where you do or don't know. I think sometimes we invert the measurement conversation before the goal setting conversation, then people set goals that are limited by measurement. But we can't forget that making sure we're making progress toward the goals is critical. Good question, Deborah, about the Michigan Merit Curriculum was visionary and performance levels have fallen consistently since that time. And how do we bring about change in graduation curriculum requirements without governance reform? There's a lot in that question. Pragmatically, the merit curriculum was visionary. I think we would argue that two things about the merit curriculum probably at this point are limiting its ability to be that driving change maker for Michigan. One is what Karen referenced, is that it focuses on exposure to content and not mastery. And so how do you have that conversation? And then two, I think it just hasn't been updated, and we haven't had that conversation here in the state about beyond the merit curriculum, like why is our performance where it is and what do we do to change it? That actually was one of the big conversations of the Growing Michigan Together Council, is just that question. So again, Launch believes that reinvention, resources, and responsibility go together. You have to have them together. And so while this conversation is very hyper-focused on graduation requirements and giving some deep information about that, we agree that fully implementing reform in Michigan requires that governance reform, along with the funding and with this reinvented understanding of a high school diploma. That might be a separate webinar for us to talk about some of our thoughts on that. Thanks, Sean, for the shout out. Again, for what it's worth, we also feel that I think we've done a good job as a state since 2006 trying to tinker with the merit curriculum, and be responsive. We added world language, like things have happened. But at some point, tinkering only gets you so far. And I think where our performance levels are struggling to get traction. Launch definitely is an organization that says we're due for a more comprehensive overhaul of things, starting with clear articulation of goals. Where are we trying to go as a state? And, again, I'll say it again, linking that up with adequate and equitable funding and governance reform. And I appreciate the comment about the SAT. I think right now, I would phrase it a little bit differently, that the SAT is the major performance measure right now. It is aligned with content standards in a sense. We can talk more about that in the future, but I think the SAT does not, it's not the whole picture. And so that's the conversation I'd love us to talk about going forward. If I get to lead the conversation, I would say yes, and like, what does the SAT measure well? What doesn't it measure well? Any other Q&A? Anything else people want to add to the Q&A? And again, I apologies for using the chat or saying chat instead of Q&A.
Okay. Well, there's always going to be an opportunity to reach out to myself or Vanessa with any follow-up questions you might have. We will be meeting again on Monday the 16th for our next series, or I'm sorry, our next session of the 3-part series. But thank you for attending the session today. It was really great questions that you all had, and we know it was a lot of information, but we will be following up with an email to provide the recordings, but also you can find our recordings on our website and via social media. We encourage you to sign up for the additional sessions. If you haven't already, we'll be in touch with those notifications and reminders as well. But also encourage you to check out our website to see what else we're working on and kind of our efforts in a full picture there. So with that, again, we want to thank you for joining us today, and we hope you have a great week and look forward to hopefully seeing you on Monday. Bye for now.
Thank you all.